The yellow school bus lurched to a stop on Highway 42, black smoke billowing from under the hood. Mrs. Patterson wiped sweat from her forehead as 23 excited third graders pressed their faces against the windows, eager to reach the Natural History Museum. "Just a little engine trouble, kids," she called out, stepping off the bus to check the damage. But as she lifted the hood, she didn't notice the figure shambling out of the nearby cornfield. Torn clothes, vacant eyes, and flesh hanging from its bones. The first scream came from little Emma in the back row, then another, and another. Within minutes, what started as an innocent field trip would become the longest day of these children's lives. Some would make it home. Others wouldn't. Welcome to Shadowverse, where we explore the darkest corners of survival horror. Don't forget to subscribe and comment your favorite topic below. Now let's see how 23 children and one teacher fought against impossible odds when the dead started walking. The morning had started so perfectly. Mrs. Patterson remembered checking her watch at 8:47 a.m., smiling as she counted heads one final time before departure. 23 bright faces stared back at her, lunchboxes clutched tight, permission slips safely tucked in her folder. The Natural History Museum was only an hour away, and the weather couldn't have been more beautiful. But now, stranded on this empty stretch of Highway 42, that perfect morning felt like a lifetime ago. "Mrs. Patterson, why is there smoke?" asked Tommy, his gap-toothed grin replaced by genuine concern. The other children began to murmur, their excitement shifting to worry as thick black smoke continued pouring from beneath the yellow hood. "It's nothing serious, sweetheart. Mr. Jenkins will have us back on the road in no time." She tried to keep her voice steady, but privately, Mrs. Patterson was beginning to panic. Her cell phone showed no signal, and they hadn't seen another car for the past 20 minutes. The cornfield stretched endlessly on both sides of the road, tall enough to hide anything lurking within. She stepped down from the bus, leaving the door open behind her. "Everyone stay in your seats, I'm just going to take a quick look." The engine hissed angrily as she approached. Steam mixed with the acrid smell of burning oil, and she could already tell this wasn't something a simple roadside fix could solve. They were going to need a tow truck, which meant calling the school, which meant explaining to Principal Morrison why his prize teacher was stranded in the middle of nowhere with 23 scared children. That's when she heard the rustling. At first she thought it was just the wind moving through the cornstalks, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Something was moving through those towering rows, heading directly toward the road, toward them. Mrs. Patterson squinted against the morning sun, her hand raised to shield her eyes. A figure emerged from between the stalks about 50 yards away. Relief flooded through her chest. Another person meant help, maybe even someone with a working cell phone. "Hello," she called out, waving her arm. "Excuse me, we could use some help over here." The figure didn't respond, but it kept moving toward them with that same strange, shuffling gait. As it drew closer, Mrs. Patterson's relief began to curdle into something else entirely. The person's clothes were torn, hanging in shreds from a frame that seemed too thin, too angular. Dark stains covered the fabric, stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Hello?" she called again, her voice smaller now, uncertain. The figure was close enough now that she could see its face, or what was left of it. Pale skin hung loose from the skull, and one eye dangled from its socket by threads of tissue. The mouth hung open, revealing teeth stained dark with something Mrs. Patterson didn't want to identify. But it was the smell that hit her first. The overwhelming stench of decay and rot that made her gag and stumble backward. This wasn't a person. This couldn't be a person. The thing, because that's what it was, a thing, raised its head and let out a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its chest. Then it picked up speed, shambling directly toward her with outstretched arms. Mrs. Patterson's training kicked in. 23 children, her responsibility, her babies. She turned and ran. "Close the door! Close the door!" Mrs. Patterson screamed as she launched herself up the bus steps. Her hands shook violently as she yanked the lever, sealing them inside just as rotting fingers scraped against the yellow exterior. The children erupted into chaos. Some screamed, others cried, and a few of the older kids pressed their faces against the windows, trying to get a better look at the nightmare outside. Emma Martinez, always the brave one, stood up in her seat. "Mrs. Patterson, what was that thing? It looked sick." "Sit down, Emma. Everyone sit down right now." Mrs. Patterson's voice carried an authority she'd never used before, sharp enough to cut through the panic. The children obeyed instantly, sensing something in their teacher's tone that spoke of real danger. The creature pressed itself against the bus door, its face smearing against the glass. Up close, the damage was even worse. Chunks of flesh were missing from its cheeks, and a thick, dark fluid oozed from multiple wounds. But the worst part was its eyes, or rather, the complete absence of intelligence behind them. This thing wasn't human anymore, if it ever had been. Mrs. Patterson fumbled for her phone, praying she'd somehow found a signal in the last few minutes. Nothing. The screen showed the same maddening, no-service message that had been taunting her all morning. "Does anyone's parent have one of those fancy phones?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Sometimes they work better than mine." 3 hands shot up. Sarah Chen, the mayor's daughter, produced a sleek smartphone from her backpack. "My mom just got this last week," she said proudly, handing it over. "It has GPS and everything." Mrs. Patterson's heart sank as she stared at the screen. No signal bars. Not even one. Outside, the creature had begun to circle the bus, dragging its feet through the gravel. It moved with purpose now, testing different sides, looking for weakness. And that moan, that horrible, hollow sound, was getting louder, more urgent. "Mrs. Patterson," whispered Jake Morrison, the principal's son. "There's another one." She followed his pointing finger and felt her stomach drop. A second figure had emerged from the cornfield, this one missing most of its left arm. Then a third appeared, and a fourth. They were all converging on the bus, drawn by the sound and movement inside. "Everyone move to the back," she ordered. "Quietly. Don't make any sudden movements." The children shuffled toward the rear seats, their earlier excitement replaced by a terror none of them fully understood. Mrs. Patterson had read about situations like this in the emergency preparedness manuals, but those scenarios involved natural disasters or armed intruders. Nothing in her training had prepared her for walking corpses. She tried Sarah's phone again, then Tommy's, then little Michael's tablet that his grandmother had packed for the trip. Nothing worked. They were completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a metal box with creatures that belonged in nightmares circling outside. The first creature had found the door mechanism. Its rotting fingers clawed at the handle, and Mrs. Patterson watched in horror as the lever began to move. The door's pneumatic system had failed along with everything else, but manual operation was still possible if you knew where to press. "Everybody hold on to something," she said, moving toward the driver's seat. "We're getting out of here." She turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then fell silent. Steam continued to pour from under the hood, and now she could smell something burning inside the engine compartment. They weren't going anywhere. "Help me with these seats," Mrs. Patterson said, grabbing the nearest child-sized chair. "We need to block the door." The older kids jumped into action immediately, their natural eagerness to help now channeled into something life or death important. Emma and Jake worked together to flip a seat and wedge it against the door frame, while Sarah and Tommy gathered backpacks and lunchboxes to fill the gaps. Outside, the creatures pressed closer. Mrs. Patterson counted 6 now, maybe 7. They moved with that same shambling gait, but their focus was unmistakable. Something about the bus, the sounds, the movement, maybe even their scent, had attracted every walking corpse in the area. "Are they zombies?" asked Emma, her voice barely above a whisper. The word hung in the air like a curse. None of the adults in their lives had ever prepared them for this conversation. Mrs. Patterson looked into 23 pairs of frightened eyes and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "I don't know what they are, sweetheart, but they're not people anymore, and they want to hurt us, so we're not going to let them." She pulled out the emergency kit from under the driver's seat, a pathetic collection of Band-Aids, a flashlight, and some flares that were probably older than some of her students. But there at the bottom was something useful. a small crowbar meant for emergency bus evacuations. "Listen carefully," she said, holding up the metal tool. "We can't stay here. The engine's dead, and those things aren't giving up. But about half a mile down the road, I saw a gas station. If we can get there, we might find help, or at least a phone that works." Tommy raised his hand like they were still in classroom mode. "But what about them?" He pointed toward the windows where rotting faces now pressed against every pane of glass. "We're going to have to run," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "All of us. Together." The plan was insane, and she knew it. 23 8-year-olds against an unknown number of creatures that seemed immune to pain or fear. But staying on the bus meant slow death by starvation or eventual breach of their makeshift barriers. She gathered the children in the center aisle. "When I say go, we all move to the back emergency exit. I'll open it, and then we run as fast as we can toward that gas station. Nobody stops, nobody looks back. If someone falls, the person behind them helps them up. We stick together no matter what." Little Michael started crying. "I want my mommy." "I know, baby. We're going to get you back to your mommy. But first, we have to be brave. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, tears still streaming down his face. Mrs. Patterson checked her watch. 11:23 a.m. Less than 3 hours ago, they'd been singing songs and playing I Spy. Now she was planning a desperate escape from creatures that shouldn't exist. The emergency exit was their only chance. It opened outward, away from where most of the creatures were gathered. If they moved fast enough, they might reach the gas station before being overtaken. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one they had. "Remember," she whispered, gripping the crowbar tighter. "Together. Always together." The creatures had multiplied. What started as one shambling figure from the cornfield had become a small army of the undead, drawn by sounds and scents they couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. Mrs. Patterson counted 12 distinct shapes pressed against the bus windows, their rotting faces leaving greasy smears on the glass. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah whispered, pointing toward the front of the bus. "That one figured out the door." The original creature, the one that had first emerged from the corn, had managed to work its fingers into the gap where their makeshift barricade didn't quite fit. The pneumatic system was dead, but these things had all the time in the world, and no sense of pain. It was only a matter of minutes before it found the manual release. "Everyone check your shoes," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Make sure they're tied tight. We're leaving in 30 seconds. Emma raised her hand tentatively. "What if we can't all run fast enough? Tommy has asthma, and Michael's shoes are too big." The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Mrs. Patterson looked at Tommy, whose inhaler was probably in his backpack somewhere, then at little Michael with his hand-me-down sneakers that his mother had bought 2 sizes too large so he could grow into them. "We carry whoever can't keep up," she said finally. "The bigger kids help the smaller ones. Nobody gets left behind." Jake Morrison stepped forward, his father's determination written across his 8-year-old face. "I can carry Michael if I have to. My dad makes me do push-ups every morning." "I can help Tommy with his breathing," added Emma. "My sister has asthma too." Mrs. Patterson felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. These children were showing more courage than most adults would in the same situation. But courage wouldn't stop the growing crowd of undead pressing against their temporary shelter. The emergency exit beckoned from the back of the bus. She'd checked it twice. The mechanism still worked, and it opened onto the side of the road furthest from the main group of creatures. They'd have maybe a 10-second head start before the things realized what was happening and gave chase. "The gas station is straight down this road," she explained, pointing through the rear window. "See that red sign? That's where we're going. It's not far, but it's going to feel like the longest run of your life." A horrible grinding sound came from the front door. The creature had found something, a lever, a latch, maybe just the right angle to apply pressure. The barricade shifted slightly, and Mrs. Patterson saw a gap of daylight appear at the bottom. "Now or never," she muttered, moving to the emergency exit. The handle felt cold and solid in her palm, maybe the only thing on this bus that still worked properly. She looked back at the children one final time. 23 faces stared back at her, some brave, some terrified, all trusting her to get them home safely. The weight of that responsibility nearly crushed her, but she pushed the feeling down. There would be time for doubt later, if they survived. "On 3, she whispered. 1. The barricade at the front door shifted again. More gaps appeared, and she could see rotting fingers probing through the openings. 2. Tommy pulled out his inhaler and took a quick puff. Michael bent down to retie his oversized shoes one more time. Emma grabbed Sarah's hand and Jake positioned himself next to the smallest kids. The front door groaned as the creature found more leverage. Their barricade wouldn't hold much longer. 3. Mrs. Patterson yanked the emergency exit handle and kicked the door open in one fluid motion. Fresh air rushed into the stuffy bus, carrying with it the scent of growing corn and something else. The sweet, sick smell of decay that seemed to follow these creatures everywhere. Go! 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 The children poured through the opening like water through a broken dam. Emma first, then Sarah, then Tommy clutching his inhaler. Mrs. Patterson helped boost the smaller ones down, her eyes constantly scanning the area around the back of the bus. 3 creatures had noticed the commotion and were already rounding the rear of the vehicle, their mouths hanging open in silent hunger. But the main group was still focused on the front door, still trying to claw their way through the barricade that no longer mattered. "Stay together," Mrs. Patterson shouted as she jumped down from the bus. "Run for the red sign." The gas station looked impossibly far away, like something from a mirage shimmering in the distance. The road stretched between them and safety, empty except for the heat waves rising from the asphalt. No other cars, no other people, just 23 children and 1 teacher racing against creatures that felt no fatigue. Jake had indeed grabbed Michael, practically carrying the smaller boy as they ran. Emma stayed close to Tommy, ready to help if his asthma kicked in. The other children formed a loose group, their backpacks bouncing as they sprinted down the yellow line in the center of the road. Mrs. Patterson brought up the rear, the crowbar clutched in her right hand. She could hear the creatures behind them, not quite running but moving faster than their usual shamble. The sound of dragging feet on asphalt mixed with those horrible moaning calls that seemed to echo off the cornstalks on either side of the road. "Don't look back," she called to the children. But she couldn't follow her own advice. A quick glance over her shoulder showed the entire horde had abandoned the bus and was now pursuing them. 12 creatures, maybe more, strung out across the road like some nightmare version of a foot race. Halfway to the gas station, Tommy stumbled. His inhaler flew from his hand and skittered across the asphalt, disappearing into the tall grass at the roadside. Emma immediately stopped and tried to help him up, but he was wheezing badly now, his face turning red from the exertion. "Leave me," he gasped between breaths. "I can't keep up." "Nobody gets left behind," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, reaching them both. She scooped Tommy up in her arms, surprised by how light he felt. Adrenaline made everything possible, even carrying a child while running from the undead. The gas station was closer now, close enough to see that the windows were boarded up and weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. Her heart sank. If the place was abandoned, they might have run straight into another trap. But then she saw it. A faded sign in the window that read "Open." And more importantly, a pickup truck parked behind the building, its chrome bumper gleaming in the sunlight. "Almost there," she shouted to the children. "Almost there." The fastest runners, Emma, Jake, and Sarah, reached the gas station first. They pressed themselves against the boarded windows, looking for a way in. The front door was locked, but Jake found a side entrance that stood slightly ajar. "In here," he called, waving the others forward. Mrs. Patterson risked another look back. The creatures were gaining ground, their relentless pursuit eating up the distance between hunter and prey. The closest one, a woman in a torn business suit, was maybe 50 yards behind them now. Close enough to see the dark stains around her mouth and the way her broken fingers clawed at the air. Tommy was getting heavier in her arms, but the gas station was right there. Just a few more steps. "Everyone inside," she ordered. "Right now." The interior of the gas station was a maze of overturned shelves and scattered merchandise. Someone had been here recently. There were signs of a struggle, dark stains on the linoleum floor, and the cash register hung open like a metal mouth. But more importantly, there was a landline phone mounted on the wall behind the counter. Mrs. Patterson set Tommy down gently and immediately grabbed the phone. The dial tone was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. 911, what's your emergency? This is Patricia Patterson, Riverside Elementary. I have 23 children with me and we're being attacked by, I don't know what to call them. They look like people, but they're not. They're dead, but they're moving. A pause. Ma'am, can you repeat that? We're at the Sinclair gas station on Highway 42, about 15 miles south of town. These things are trying to kill us. Please send help immediately. Through the boarded windows, she could see the creatures arriving. They pressed against the glass and plywood, testing for weaknesses just like they had with the bus. But this building was sturdier, and the barricades looked like they'd been installed recently. Help is on the way, ma'am. Can you secure your location? We're trying. Mrs. Patterson looked around desperately. The side door they'd entered through had no lock, just a simple knob that turned freely. I need something to block this door. The older children immediately started dragging debris, a broken shelf, some bags of dog food, anything heavy they could find. But Mrs. Patterson could already hear scratching at the walls, the sound of fingernails against wood and metal. That's when they heard the engine. At first, she thought it might be help arriving early. But the sound was wrong. Too rough, too loud. Through a gap in the boards, she saw the pickup truck she'd noticed earlier roaring around the side of the building. The driver was a man in his 50s, wearing coveralls and a baseball cap. He rolled down his window and shouted something she couldn't quite hear over the engine noise. Then she saw the shotgun mounted in his rear window and understood. The truck plowed straight into the group of creatures, sending bodies flying in all directions. Some got back up immediately, but others stayed down, their limbs twisted at impossible angles. The man backed up and rammed them again, then again, until the parking lot looked like a war zone. "Y'all okay in there?" he called, stepping out of the truck with the shotgun in his hands. Mrs. Patterson unlocked the door and peered out. Half the creatures were down, but the other half were already recovering, starting their shambling approach toward this new target. "We're okay," she called back. "But there are children in here." "I figured as much when I saw the school bus." He raised the shotgun and fired twice, dropping the two closest creatures with precise headshots. "Name's Earl Hutchinson. I own this place. Been hiding in the back room since this whole mess started." More creatures were emerging from the cornfield, drawn by the gunshots, the noise, or maybe just the scent of living people. Mrs. Patterson counted at least 6 new ones, with more shadows moving between the stalks. "Can't stay here much longer," Earl said, reloading. "These things just keep coming. But I've got room in the truck for everyone if we move fast." Mrs. Patterson looked at the pickup bed, then at 23 children who'd already been through more than any kid should experience. "Will we all fit?" "We'll make it fit," Earl said grimly, "because the alternative ain't worth thinking about." The sound of sirens finally reached them, distant but growing closer. Help was coming, but not fast enough. More creatures shambled out of the corn, and somewhere in the distance she could hear that horrible moaning sound multiplying. "Everyone hold hands," Mrs. Patterson called to the children. "We're going to that truck and we're going home." As they prepared for one final dash to safety, she couldn't help but think how this morning had started with such simple hopes. A field trip, some learning, maybe an ice cream stop on the way back to school. Now she just wanted to get her babies home alive. The rescue crews arrived 20 minutes later to find Earl's pickup truck parked safely at the county sheriff's office. 23 exhausted children wrapped in blankets and clutching juice boxes like lifelines. Mrs. Patterson sat on the tailgate, still holding the crowbar that had become her lifeline, watching as hazmat teams cordoned off Highway 42. The official report called it a chemical spill from an overturned truck that had caused severe neurological symptoms in wildlife and isolated individuals. The children were sworn to secrecy, their parents paid generous settlements, and the whole incident disappeared into classified files that would never see daylight. But Mrs. Patterson knew better. She'd looked into those empty, hungry eyes and seen something that no chemical could create. Something that had been waiting in those cornfields, maybe for years, until a broken-down school bus full of innocent children had finally woken it up. She never taught again. How could she? knowing that every field trip, every school bus ride, every moment outside the safety of familiar walls could turn into a nightmare without warning. The other teachers said she was lucky to be alive. The parents called her a hero. The children went back to their normal lives, as children do. They had birthday parties and homework and arguments about video games. But sometimes, late at night, they'd wake up screaming about yellow buses and things that used to be people. Their parents would hold them and whisper that it was just a bad dream, never knowing how close to the truth those nightmares really were. Earl Hutchinson reopened his gas station 6 months later, after the government crews finished their environmental cleanup. He installed better security systems, stocked more ammunition, and never went anywhere without that shotgun. Some nights, when the wind moved through the corn just right, he could swear he still heard them moaning. And Mrs. Patterson? She moved to Arizona, as far from cornfields as she could get. But even in the desert, surrounded by nothing but sand and sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between what we know and what we fear, those things were still waiting. Because the truth is, we never really know what's lurking just out of sight, ready to turn our most ordinary moments into something from our worst nightmares. That's the terrifying thing about survival horror. It can start anywhere, anytime. One moment you're living your normal life, and the next, you're fighting for survival against something that shouldn't exist. What would you do in Mrs. Patterson's situation? Could you keep 23 kids safe when the world suddenly stopped making sense? And more importantly, what other horrors might be waiting in the places we think are safe? If stories like this give you that perfect mix of terror and fascination, you're in the right place. Here at Shadowverse, we explore every dark corner of the human experience, from zombie apocalypses to haunted houses to psychological thrillers that'll keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories that'll make you question every shadow, every strange sound, and every seemingly innocent school bus you see on the road. And drop a comment below with your favorite horror topic, whether it's ghosts, monsters, or just the terrifying possibilities hiding in everyday life. Trust me, there are plenty more nightmares where this one came from. Sweet dreams.